Hello guys, welcome to another Laravel tutorial. In this lesson, we are going to learn how to create custom artisan commands. You know those commands you can head over to the terminal and run and something happens. We are going to learn quite a number of things. For example, we are going to learn how to accept input to our command through what we call arguments and options. We're also going to see how to make both arguments and options optional for the command, as well as how you can pass default values for both arguments and options. We are going to learn how to ask user to do something from the command line. For example, if user runs the command, you tell the user what you want them to do and they supply that to the command, and the command can use whatever the user supplied to process further. We are also going to see how to ask the user to confirm their action. For example, say user wants to do something a bit dicey, like delete some records. You want to ask the user to confirm, like, are you sure you want to proceed? You know, that sort of question. And the user can confirm before the command proceeds further. So these and more are the things we are going to cover in this lesson, and I hope you learn a lot from it. Before we get started, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you get notified whenever we have such great content. All right, let's get into it. Let's start off with what we already know. If you have used Laravel before, or if you've been using it for some time now, you're probably familiar with some artisan command. For example, to create an eloquent model, we can say PHP artisan make model, and here you give the model a name, for example post. This will create an eloquent model located inside the models folder in your Laravel project. Our goal is to define our own command, our custom command, which you can call and invoke it the same way you invoke the default command, artisan command that comes with the Laravel project. To get started with that, what we need to do is to head over to the terminal and generate a command file or class. The file we are going to generate will be located inside commands folder, which will be inside the console folder. Right now we don't have commands folder here, but the moment we generate a file, we are going to see that folder appear here. So how do you generate a command file? We say PHP command, not again, PHP artisan make, can't type, command. You give the command a name. Let's say for example we want to send newsletter, weekly newsletter, newsletter. So we call the command send newsletter. You hit enter. Then we go over to the project. Now you can see we have commands folder, and inside it is the send newsletter command that we just created. Let's take a look at the send newsletter command to understand the structure of our custom command. The first thing you will notice is that we have to extend this class illuminate console command. So in case you create this manually by going over here to add a file, make sure that the correct class is extended. Then down here we have signature. Signature is what we use to invoke the command. For example, signature for creating new model is make model, like we saw earlier. So we say PHP artisan make model. Here you give your command a signature that is descriptive of what the command is for. For example, we can say newsletter send. It means that when we want to run this command, we say php artisan newsletter send. That's how we invoke the command. Then we have description. Basically, you give your command description to describe what it does. So let's say, for example, sends weekly newsletter. That's what our command does. This is a constructor that calls the parent constructor. And then we have a method handle. This method gets invoked when we run the command. As a quick example, let me delete this. To display something on the console, we can say this info. Inside there, we pass a message. Let's say, hello world. Save that. So we go over to the terminal and invoke our command using the signature. Over to the terminal, let's go ahead and run that command. php artisan newsletter send. We get a message, hello world, right? So although we have a hello world message here you can basically do whatever you want this command to do. For example, if you want the command to dispatch a job, which is another common use case for custom commands like this, or you want to process something, let's say we get to an example in a moment. Now let's assume that you want the command to take some input from the user. How do you do that? We can accept input into the commands by using arguments or options. Let's take a look at arguments first. So let's assume that we want to send newsletter to single user identified by the ID. We can come over here and say user. This will represent the user ID we are going to supply. Then down here I'm going to have a function. Let's say public function send. This can be a function from another class or a dispatching a job or something like that. But here, let's just have the function defined right inside this command. So we say send newsletter or send. How do we accept that argument? So this function is going to expect an integer that is user ID. And here we're just going to say user to be equal to the user model, find user ID to get the user. Then over here, instead of just hello world, let's go ahead and call the function. We say this send. Send expects user ID. We can get the argument like this. We say user ID to be equal to this argument user. Yeah, we call that user. So this is how we can get the user ID. I will pass it to the send method, right? We can even come here and display the ID. So when we pass the ID, we are sure that that is what we are getting here. So I'll just say user ID is user ID. Save that. Go back to the terminal and run the command one more time. Without the argument, let's see what happens when we don't pass that argument. So we get an error that says we are missing the argument user. Let's go ahead and pass ID1 as user ID. You can see we get that feedback here. User ID is 1. Of course, you can name this user ID if you prefer to do so, right? You can name it whatever you want to name it. We can as well display the user email info. Of course, you already know that we got the user from the database. email. In my database, I have about 20 users which I inserted just for this demonstration. So make sure you have user in the database. I will run this command again. We have the email. So this works. This is how you pass an argument. What if you want the argument to be optional? All you have to do is put this question mark there, and I'll comment this out. I don't want to see some errors. You put the question mark, that means user is optional. So we can go ahead and call the command again with argument. We get that argument. Without the argument, just a moment, we get an error. The error is because we are supposed to pass an integer, but we are passing no. I think so. The error is because of here. We said that this must be an integer. Let me just remove it temporarily. I'll clear the console, run this again. You can see user ID, nothing, right? So that's how you make argument optional. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is options. We have talked about arguments. Let's look at options. Before we get to option, just one last thing I want to point out about arguments. You can pass a default value by just saying, let's say the ID to be 2 by default, right? So it means that even if we don't pass argument over here, the ID is going to be 2. So I go ahead and send that. You can see we have 2 here. We don't get the error anymore. Okay, now let's look at options. The syntax is a little is somehow similar to passing arguments. Options are used for let me just give you a demonstration. For example, we can say where status or where active. We want to send the newsletter only to users that are active. So similar way we accepted argument. Actually, we can have both. So let me still leave argument where it is with that default option. And here we can take options. So we say active. Then down here, we are going to accept 2 parameters. The next one is a boolean, bool active, and I want to display both of them. Active, 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 and of course this is expecting that we pass that second argument. But instead of for active, remember that this is an option, this is an argument. The difference here is that this has this double hyphen, right? This doesn't have double hyphen. Argument, no double hyphen. Option, double hyphen. That's the difference. So instead of argument here, we say this option active. That is the option. And as a second argument, we pass option here. We pass active, sorry. Let's go over to the terminal and run the command one more time. Say PHP Artisan newsletter send. This time we still have the default value that we specified for user, but active is not showing anything. The reason we are not getting anything for active is when active doesn't receive any user input, it is treated as a boolean. So this active here is just a boolean value, right? Let me show you by passing a value to it. So it's currently 0 when we don't pass anything. But if I say active, notice how you pass that argument, sorry, the option with the double hyphen. If you call this again with the double hyphen, you can see we get 1. In the previous case, it was 0. Now, if you want to maybe assign a value to this, let's say active equals to true active equal to something. In that case, this is not going to be a boolean by default. What we can do is let's just change this to, let's say, string. We're expecting a string type, and to accept a value we put equality sign, right? Just like that. It means that the next time we run the command, we can now pass a value like active to be equal to yes, like that. Run the command again, you can see we get the string yes. So it's just similar to what we did for argument. To accept a value, we use equality sign. And if you want a default value, of course you do the same thing. Let's just put no there by default. And this time I will run the command without passing any of the no argument, no option. You can see we get all the default values. So far we have seen how to take input, make the inputs optional, as well as assigning default values, both for arguments and options. And there are other ways you can take input from the user. For example, if we want to accept multiple arguments, we can use the wildcard symbol. In that case, when we go over to the terminal, we can supply the list of user IDs. Let me change this, or let me just remove this entire thing. We already know that you can do whatever you want to do here. You can call a method, dispatch a job, and all that. So what I want to do is to go over to the terminal. Instead of just one user ID, we can supply list of user IDs. Let's head over to the terminal, and this time we supply multiple IDs. So over to the terminal, we say PHP Artisan newsletter send, and the ID should be, let's just say 251. We don't need a comma, just 2571, like that. We hit enter again. Okay, we are not displaying anything in the console. Let's just quickly display something. I will change this to user IDs so it makes more sense, and I'll change this user to users there, and of course up there. So the argument is users this time. Now what we can do is for I equals 0, I less than count of user IDs, I plus plus, and I'll just quickly copy this user ID to be, I think I have an error there, I equal to 0, okay, I. So this will be user IDs I. Save that, we go over to terminal one more time. You can see we have all the user ID we imputed. This way you can go ahead to make use of the user ID. The user IDs as you see fit. The next thing we are going to do is to prompt the user to enter something, right? So for example, let's say you want to, when the user runs the command, we want them to supply an email address. We can say something like enter an email address to make our command a little more interactive. The way we can do that is, I'll just comment this out. We don't need this. I can just delete these things here, delete all that. Now to prompt user to do something, or to ask user to impute something, we can say let email to be equal to this ask. Inside here you pass what you want to ask the user. For example, enter an email. We go back and run the command again. Run the command. It says enter an email. Let's just say abc@d.e, right? So we can accept that input, of course, We already accepted the input with the email variable. So we can say this info and we display that email. I'll go back and run the command again. We don't need these arguments. Click send. Okay, so this time we don't need arguments. We can make it optional. The way we can make the argument, that is the array of user IDs, to be optional is by passing this, putting this question mark here. Now it is optional. We can go back and run the command again. We get the prompt, someone at example.com. You can see what we displayed in the console. That is this line here. We got the email. And then let's look at how to ask user to confirm an action. I will show with an example. Let's say after the user has entered whatever that is required to be entered, we want the user to finally confirm that they want to execute this command or to send the newsletter. To do that, we can say this, or let's call it confirmed. Let's save it in a variable, confirmed, to be equal to this confirm. Let's say send now. We're asking the user to confirm if they want to send it now. We're going to, let's just go ahead and display their option, the answer. Say this info send to be confirmed. Save that, go back to the terminal. Let me clear this up a little bit. Run the command again. The first one is email. Email can be, I don't know, just put something there. And then we get the question, send now. By default, it is going to be no. If you want to approve that, you say yes. So let me just accept default by hitting enter. You can see the option is 0. So it's 0 or 1. Let's do another one. Enter an email. This time I want to say yes. Say yes. You can see that send is 1. Okay guys, so I believe that we have learned quite a number of things so far. To wrap things up, let's just do a quick summary. The signature is what we use to invoke the command, right? In this case, it is newsletter send. We can pass arguments, we can pass options. The key difference is that this has this double hyphen, that is for option, and this is argument. Here we have a description that describes what the command does, and down here is what does the heavy lifting sort of. This is the handle method is the method that is invoked when we run the command, right? And we have seen the different ways we can accept input from the user, as well as the way we can make this a little more interactive, like prompting the user to enter an email address and asking the user to confirm if they want to take this action. Now there are still more stuff you can learn about writing custom command in Laravel. I will encourage you to check out the official documentation to learn more how to go about this. Alright, I hope this makes sense to someone. Until next time, happy coding.